Cardiologists have a name for what's happening inside your body right now. They call it sympathetic overdrive. And if your doctor has ever mentioned metoprolol, atenolol, or bisoprolol, it means your heart is already caught in this trap. But here's what they rarely tell you in that 5-minute appointment. There are 5 foods that work on the exact same biological pathway as those pills. No prescription required, no pharmacy visits, no side effects that quietly destroy your job performance, your marriage, or your sense of who you are. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how this works. Starting with the biological mechanism your cardiologist likely never explained, and ending with the protocol you can begin this week. Before we go further, something important. I put together a complete guide on naturally lowering blood pressure. My personal clinical protocol. It includes tracking sheets, timing recommendations, and the full research citations behind everything I'm about to share. It's called the Natural Blood Pressure Protocol, and it's completely free. The link is in my profile header and in the description below this video. Grab it after we finish here, because what I'm about to show you works significantly better when you have the tools to measure your progress week by week. Your numbers, your data, your evidence. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening inside your body, because almost everything you've been told about high blood pressure is incomplete. Most men over 45 think the problem is simple. Blood pressure is high. Take a pill, lower the number. That's not wrong exactly. But it's the beginning of a chain of dominoes. And if you don't understand the full chain, every domino after the first one blindsides you. Because the number on the blood pressure cuff, that's not the disease. That's the symptom. The fever, not the infection. The real problem is something called sympathetic nervous system overdrive. Your autonomic nervous system has 2 modes. The first is sympathetic activation. What most people know as fight or flight. Your heart rate increases. Blood vessels constrict. Adrenaline and noradrenaline flood your bloodstream. Your body prepares for a threat. Any threat, real or perceived. The second mode is parasympathetic activation. Rest and repair. Heart rate slows. Blood vessels relax. Digestion works properly. Immune function recovers. This is the mode where actual healing happens. For millions of men over 45, the sympathetic system is stuck in the on position. Not because there's a tiger in the room, but because chronic stress, disrupted sleep, and inflammatory diet, and years of sedentary patterns have essentially jammed the switch. The system that was designed to save you from acute danger is now running continuously in the background. Every hour of every day. Think of it like a car engine revving at 4,000 RPM while you're sitting in a parking lot. The engine isn't broken, but it's burning fuel it shouldn't be burning, generating heat it shouldn't be generating, wearing down components that were designed to last for decades. Your heart is doing exactly the same thing, day after day, while you go about your life, while you feel no obvious warning signs, while you assume things are basically fine. The damage is compounding quietly. And here's where the pharmaceutical solution enters the picture. And here's where the next domino falls. Beta blockers. Drugs like metoprolol, atenolol, bisoprolol, and carvedilol work by blocking the beta-adrenergic receptors in your heart and blood vessels. When adrenaline and noradrenaline are released by your sympathetic system, they normally bind to these receptors and drive up your heart rate and the force of each contraction. Beta blockers sit in those receptor sites like a plug in a socket, preventing the adrenaline signal from getting through. The heart rate slows. Blood pressure drops. Numbers look better on paper. But here's what the pharmaceutical model doesn't address. The underlying sympathetic overdrive is still there. Your nervous system is still revving at 4,000 RPM. You've simply disconnected the dashboard warning light. The engine is still running hot. The damage is still accumulating. You just can't see the indicator anymore. And here's the biological problem most cardiologists don't warn you about, at least not in a 5-minute appointment. When you block those beta receptors artificially with a pharmaceutical, your body detects that the receptors aren't responding normally. So it compensates, it upregulates, it manufactures more receptors. It makes those receptors increasingly sensitive to whatever adrenaline does get through. Your biology is fighting back, trying to restore the signaling it depends on. You become dependent, not psychologically, biologically. You need the pill not just to manage the original problem, but to prevent your own compensatory biology from triggering a dangerous rebound. And while this dependency builds, the side effects are doing damage in ways that don't show up on any EKG or routine blood test. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Bob. Bob came to me at 53 years old, project manager at a construction firm, solid career, reasonable income, 24 years of marriage, 3 kids finishing college. His doctor had put him on metoprolol 2 years earlier after his blood pressure hit 150/95. Standard protocol. The numbers came down. His cardiologist was satisfied, but Bob was losing his mind, not literally. But when he sat across from me, he described something I've heard from hundreds of men on beta blockers. He said, "Dr. Wallace, I feel like I'm watching my own life through a window. I'm there. That's beta blocker, induced cognitive impairment. Brain fog. One of the most common and least discussed side effects of this drug class. Beta receptors aren't only in your heart. They're distributed throughout your brain. When you block them systemically, you slow neural signaling, reduce cerebral blood flow, and interfere with the catecholamine systems involved in memory, focus, and executive function." Bob was forgetting details at work, making errors he hadn't made in 20 years of managing complex projects. His supervisor eventually put him on a performance improvement plan. A man who had overseen multi-million-dollar construction projects for 2 decades suddenly struggling to keep track of basic scheduling. The chronic fatigue started around month 3 on the medication. He described waking up and feeling like he'd already worked a full shift before his feet hit the floor. Because in a sense, he had. Beta blockers reduce cardiac output. Less blood moving efficiently through the body means less oxygen delivered to muscles and brain tissue. The fatigue isn't laziness. It isn't weakness. It is your cardiovascular system operating at a fraction of its designed capacity, and your body registering that deficit every single morning. And then depression arrived. His wife noticed something else before he did. She said nothing for months. Eventually, she had to say it. That conversation nearly ended their marriage. Beta blockers reduce the cardiac and vascular response to all sympathetic stimulation, including the kind you want and need for normal sexual function. In men, erectile function depends on both parasympathetic vasodilation and sympathetic coordination working together in precise sequence. Disrupt that system pharmacologically, and you disrupt the function itself. Studies suggest that somewhere between 30 and 40% of men on beta blockers experience clinically significant sexual dysfunction. That is not a footnote side effect. That is a major quality of life finding that should be front and center in every single patient conversation. By the time Bob came to see me, he had already made a decision. He had done his research. He had found online forums where other men described identical experiences, and he had decided to stop his medication on his own. That decision almost sent him to the emergency room. This is the critical warning. If you take only one thing from this video, it must be this: you cannot stop beta blockers suddenly. You cannot. Bob cut his dose in half without telling his cardiologist. Within 72 hours, his resting heart rate shot up to 120 beats per minute. His blood pressure spiked to 170/105, higher than it had ever been before medication. He had chest pressure, cold sweat. He drove himself to the emergency room. This is called rebound tachycardia and rebound hypertension. It's not a fringe risk. It is documented, predictable pharmacology. And it can be lethal. Remember what I explained about the body compensating by manufacturing more receptors. Now those upregulated receptors, those hypersensitive binding sites, are suddenly exposed to full adrenaline load with no blocker in the way. The result is a cardiovascular surge that can trigger a heart attack, a dangerous arrhythmia, or a hypertensive crisis. Bob was fortunate. He stabilized in the emergency room and was discharged. He came to me the next day scared and looking for another path. So let me tell you what I told him. You cannot stop the medication today. but you can build the physiological conditions that make it unnecessary over time. You can create your own natural braking system gradually through specific foods, so that when your cardiologist eventually reviews your blood pressure data and considers reducing the dose, your body already has its own regulation in place. That system exists in 5 specific foods. These foods activate the same biological pathways as pharmaceutical beta blockers. They reduce sympathetic nervous system activity. They lower heart rate. They dilate blood vessels, but they do it through natural compounds your body has been processing for thousands of years. Without the receptor upregulation, without the biological dependency, without the side effects that dismantled Bob's career and marriage. This is the protocol. The first food is celery. Raw celery contains a compound called 3N-butylphthalide, abbreviated as 3NB, belonging to a class called phthalides. It has a well-documented vasodilator effect, meaning it relaxes the smooth muscle in the walls of your blood vessels, allowing those vessels to widen. When vessels widen, peripheral resistance drops. And when resistance drops, your heart doesn't have to work nearly as hard to push blood through the system. Think of it like removing a kink from a garden hose. The pressure at the source drops immediately, not because the pump is weaker, but because the flow path opened. Research published in the Journal of Medicinal Food showed that 3NB can reduce systolic blood pressure by up to 12% over 4 weeks of consistent consumption. That's a clinically meaningful number, comparable to what some low-dose pharmaceuticals achieve. The protocol: 4 stalks per day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening. Raw is essential, not cooked, not in a soup, not sautéed. Heat breaks down 3NB significantly. Juiced is acceptable. Blended into a smoothie works well. Cold preparation preserves the compound. Hot preparation largely destroys it. This is the mistake most people make when they read about celery and blood pressure. They add it to cooked dishes and wonder why nothing changes. The second food is fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, the most bioavailable sources of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA. These compounds act on the sympathetic nervous system through multiple pathways simultaneously. They reduce the production of prostaglandins and leukotrienes, inflammatory signaling molecules that chronically elevate sympathetic tone. They also have a direct effect on the pacemaker cells of your sinoatrial node, the specialized cardiac tissue that sets the baseline rhythm of your heartbeat. Research from the American Heart Association found that consistent omega-3 consumption lowers resting heart rate by 4 to 6 beats per minute in men with elevated cardiovascular risk. 4 to 6 beats per minute sounds modest. It is not. That's pharmacological territory achieved through diet. The protocol 120g, approximately 4 O's, 3 to 4 times per week, baked or grilled only. Frying at high heat oxidizes the omega-3 fats and forms lipid peroxides that actively promote inflammation, inverting the benefit entirely. If fish isn't practical multiple times a week, a high-quality fish oil supplement providing 2g of combined EPA and DHA daily is an effective alternative. Are you currently taking a blood pressure medication? If so, write the name in the comments below. Just the medication name. One word. I read every comment. I'm building a video series on natural approaches organized by drug class, and your comment tells me which one to prioritize next. The third food is beets. Beets contain exceptionally high concentrations of dietary nitrates. When you consume them, bacteria in your mouth and digestive enzymes convert those nitrates into nitric oxide, one of the most potent natural vasodilators your body produces. Nitric oxide signals the smooth muscle lining your blood vessels to relax and expand. Vessels widen, resistance drops, blood pressure falls, and your heart rate stabilizes, because your heart is no longer fighting narrowed, constricted pathways. It's moving blood through open, cooperative vessels. A meta-analysis of 12 randomized controlled trials published in the journal Hypertension found that regular beet consumption reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 4 mmol of mercury. For context, some pharmaceutical interventions at low dose produce comparable or smaller reductions. The protocol: 1 medium beet per day, roasted, steamed, or raw, 200 ml of fresh beet juice delivers an equivalent dose if you prefer that form. Timing matters specifically with beets. Consume them between 600 p.m. and 800 p.m. Nitric oxide production from dietary nitrates peaks approximately 2 to 3 hours after consumption, placing that peak during the evening transition, when your body should naturally be shifting toward parasympathetic rest mode, works with your circadian biology rather than against it. The fourth food is garlic. Raw garlic contains allicin, a compound with documented effects on sympathetic nervous system activity at the receptor level. A major review published in the Journal of Nutrition found that allicin reduces adrenaline receptor sensitivity, meaning that even when adrenaline is present and circulating, its effect on heart rate and vascular constriction is meaningfully attenuated. It's working on a mechanism similar to a pharmaceutical beta blocker, but through enzyme modulation and receptor regulation rather than direct blockade. The effect is gentler, cumulative, and critically, it does not create the upregulation problem that makes pharmaceuticals so dangerous to stop. But almost everyone makes the same mistake that eliminates most of the benefit. When you crush or chop garlic, you activate an enzyme called alliinase. This enzyme converts the precursor compound alline into active allicin, but alliinase is heat sensitive. If you drop freshly chopped garlic immediately into a hot pan, you destroy the enzyme before it completes the conversion. No functional enzyme means minimal allicin, minimal therapeutic benefit. You've turned a powerful cardiovascular food into flavoring. The 10-minute rule changes everything. Crush 1 to 2 cloves. Set them on the cutting board. Wait exactly 10 minutes at room temperature. That's sufficient time for alliinase to complete the allicin conversion fully. Then cook or consume. Even if you add the garlic to a hot dish afterward, you've already locked in the allicin. The compound itself is considerably more heat stable than the enzyme that produces it. That single 10-minute adjustment doubles or triples the therapeutic value of every clove you eat. The fifth food is dark chocolate, not milk chocolate. Not anything below 85% cocoa content. The Genuine article. Dark chocolate at 85% or higher contains dense concentrations of flavonols, a subclass of flavonoids. Flavonols trigger nitric oxide production in your vascular endothelium, the inner lining of blood vessels, through a completely different mechanism than beets, but with overlapping outcomes. They also measurably reduce cortisol, your primary stress hormone. Lower cortisol means lower sympathetic activation. It gives your nervous system a genuine biochemical signal that the threat has passed and it is safe to stand down. Research from Harvard Medical School found that daily consumption of high cocoa dark chocolate was associated with significantly lower blood pressure and reduced arterial stiffness in men over 40 who consumed it consistently across 8 weeks. The protocol 30g, roughly 1 Oz per day. Best timing is midday between 20:00 p.m. and 40:00 p.m. Cortisol follows a natural arc through the day. Highest in the early morning, declining through the afternoon. Adding flavonols during that natural afternoon decline deepens and extends the cortisol reduction. It also creates a small daily ritual of genuine pleasure. And anticipating something pleasurable is itself a measurable parasympathetic activator. Your nervous system begins to shift before the chocolate even reaches your bloodstream. The critical mistake. Buying anything labeled dark that contains 6% or 70% cocoa. At those levels, sugar content overwhelms the flavonol benefit and drives insulin responses that actively work against the rest of this protocol. 85% minimum. Read the label every time. Now, back to Bob. I implemented this protocol with Bob alongside a gradual, medically supervised medication taper, coordinated with his cardiologist. I want to be completely clear. We did not remove his metoprolol suddenly. We did not reduce it without physician direction. Any reduction in a beta blocker must be discussed with and directed by your prescribing doctor. This is not optional guidance. It is a safety requirement. What happened with Bob over the following months was the domino chain running in reverse. End of week 1. Resting heart rate dropped from 78 to 72 beats per minute. He described waking without the familiar morning heaviness. Something has shifted in how he came to consciousness each day. End of week 2. His wife said something to him. She said, "You're back." He wasn't entirely sure what had changed, the protocol or the early medication reduction or both. It was almost certainly both, but she noticed it before he did. By week 4, blood pressure was running consistently at 128/82. Not perfect, but clear. Without the fog, without the fatigue, without the dysfunction that had nearly ended his marriage. His cardiologist, reviewing 4 weeks of blood pressure logs Bob brought to the appointment, agreed to reduce the metoprolol dose by 25%. Month 3, half the original dose. Pressure stable, cognitive function restored, energy returning across the full day in a way he hadn't experienced in 2 years. He told me that for the first time in almost 3 years, he was genuinely present at his daughter's graduation dinner, not watching through the window. There, at the table, month 6, off medication entirely, under full medical supervision with weekly monitoring, then bi-weekly, then monthly. Last spring, Bob sent me a message. His supervisor had pulled him aside again, not for a performance improvement plan, to offer him a promotion. That's the chain running in the right direction. Here's a realistic timeline for what you can expect following this protocol consistently. Week 1. Reduce morning resting heart rate. Many people notice improved sleep quality as the parasympathetic system begins reasserting its natural evening dominance. Week 2. Noticeable improvement in sustained afternoon energy. The suppression of cellular oxygenation that beta blockers impose begins to lift. Week 4. Measurable blood pressure improvement. Most people in clinical practice see between 6 and 14 mmHg of mercury reduction in systolic pressure when the full 5-food protocol is followed consistently. Month 3, the kind of data that gives your physician a concrete, evidence-based reason to discuss medication adjustment at your next appointment. I want to ask you something before you go. Out of these 5 foods, how many are already part of your regular diet right now? Write the number in the comments. Just the number. I genuinely want to see the pattern. And I have a theory that most people are missing the same 2 or 3, and those missing ones are exactly where the biggest opportunity sits. This protocol does not replace your prescribed medication today. You work with your physician. You bring them a blood pressure log. You show them the numbers. You let the biology make the case. The goal is to make your own body so well regulated that the pharmaceutical becomes unnecessary. That goal is realistic for many men, but it requires consistency across months, medical partnership, and the willingness to track your progress honestly. If you want the complete system for doing that, tracking templates, timing charts, and the full research behind everything covered today, the Natural Blood Pressure Protocol Guide is in my profile header and in the description below this video. Your biology didn't reach this point overnight. It built through years of accumulated signals, thousands of mornings, thousands of meals, thousands of nights of incomplete rest, and it will recalibrate through better ones, but you can begin giving those signals today. 1 stalk of celery with breakfast. 1 piece of salmon this week. 1 crushed clove of garlic with 10 minutes of patience before you add it to your food. Start there. That's the first domino, and once it falls, the rest follow.